I was going to say hello in Finnish, but I think Niall beat me in Finnish, so I will just say hello. Thank you, Tony Karlalinen, I think. Is that okay? Thanks for bringing me here. Thank you, Lisa Klaus, for coordinating my appearance. Aalto University, University of Helsinki, all affiliated universities, International Society of Metal Music Studies, scholars, metalheads, scholarly metalheads, journalists, musicians. It is my privilege to stand before you as your keynote speaker and welcome you to this incredible conference. Welcome to Modern Heavy Metal 2015. I have to say I feel a kinship with all of you. It's as though I found a giant support group, one in which we meet not to curtail certain behaviors, but to enhance them. One in which we seek not avoidance, but enrichment. One not based on behavioral therapy, 12-step recovery programs, or curbing vices such as drinking. In which case, it would probably be a bad idea to be holding this event in Finland. The reason we're all here is a common belief, one that's obvious to everyone here tonight, but generally not as accepted outside of these walls, at least at this point in time. The idea that being an intellectual, scholar, academic, or what have you, needn't be mutually exclusive with harboring a passion for heavy metal. For some, metal is strictly a favorite musical genre. For others, a lifestyle. Some may lean towards hard rock, others hardcore. Some may prefer grindcore, others metalcore. We have black metal, death metal, doom metal, drone metal, folk metal, rap metal, prog metal, thrash metal, melodic metal, all subcategories of one broad genre, which for our purposes will break down to just a simple pair of words: heavy metal. Speaking of pairs of words, my friends, in recent years we have seen pairing of words that are now standard terms of our vocabulary that at one time would never have been imagined together. For example, smartphone, viral video, electronic cigarette, metal academia. These last two hold a special place in my heart, as I'm sure is the case for all of you as well. Since you're a bunch of scholarly folks, I will point out that I use the term heart in the figurative sense rather than the literal. These words are the very reason we're all here today, and for many of you, this entire week. I have to jump back on tour tomorrow, but it's great to be here. So I congratulate everyone for making the effort to be here, and once again, I say welcome. So, metal academia, an unlikely pair of words perhaps. But while we're on the subject, I'd like to bring up another odd pairing of words, and unlike these previous examples, this one's been with us for quite some time. This is a term from centuries past, from the time of William Shakespeare, who, if you think about it, is one of the original metalheads. I mean, think about it. Yeah, if you switched his wardrobe to a denim vest with patches, and I could see him walking around Wacken or Sonosphere. I'm pretty sure he's been quoted by Maiden, Sabbath, and every British metal band. In fact, I remember seeing a quote from him on a Venom album. And how about those witches in Macbeth? You can't get much more metal than that. No, the first time one encounters the words metal academia, one might be inclined to think of this pair of words, first credited to the bard himself: strange bedfellows. But take a closer look, and you may find that these two entities have a bit more in common than first realized. For one thing, each implies a separation, or a distinction, if you will, from mainstream thought. With academia, this distinction is marked by a heightened sense of intellect, greater diversity of interests, and higher levels of intelligence, at least in theory. Metal implies a separation from mainstream musical tastes that often goes hand in hand with certain choices of clothing, and in some cases, a large amount of tattoos. Metal and academia can each be seen as an independent entity that once in a great while bears witness to one of its star practitioners crossing over into the mainstream. An obvious example of this would be the band Metallica, who, disclaimer, I just shared a stage with a few days ago. But I respectfully use my friends here as an example, because as most of us here know, this was once a pure speed thrash metal band, leaders of an underground movement. Today they're known as the darlings of the Grammys. Rolling Stone, Billboard, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and other mainstream outlets. But whatever one's feelings on classic versus current Metallica, you have to hand it to these guys for pulling it off. This type of transition is very rare. Academics, meanwhile, seem to pierce the mainstream consciousness with a slightly greater frequency than their metal counterparts, although they are the exceptions rather than the rules. A current example of so-called public intellectual might be the TV host Neil deGrasse Tyson, who follows in the footsteps of his mentor, the equally visible and truly legendary Carl Sagan, both of whom became familiar faces to viewers of late-night talk shows, as well as scientific journals and public broadcasting programs. Other examples include Harvard professors Steven Pinker and Daniel Gilbert, both respected academics who've gone on to become internationally best-selling authors and cultural commentators. For the most part, however, the world of academia and the world of metal both exist outside the mainstream. Take a look at this chart. Now, if you look closely, you'll see there's a tiny bit of overlap between metal and academia. That sliver is more or less represented by everyone here at this conference. And another thing metal and academia have in common is this. Each implies a differentiation from mainstream interests and behavior, as well as being viewed as a society within itself, with its own societal-like group dynamic. One may join a certain group in order to escape the mainstream and share common interests with like minds, only to find themselves at odds with the conventions and expectations of their chosen peer group. I have experienced this firsthand as a metal artist whose interests include jazz, world music, literature, art, philosophy, and other subjects that are not that popular in many metal crowds. I'm sure many of you have experienced similar goings-on with scholars, as scholars with metal interests within academic communities. Because as we all know, when it comes to groups of metalheads and groups of academics, both can be a stubborn bunch. In fact, for the longest time, there was no better way to turn off a peer group of one than to display the proclivities and characteristics of the other. For example, within the metal world, if you were to exhibit behavior more befitting of an academic than a headbanger, being bookish, soft-spoken, studious, introverted, wearing civilian clothing, much like these folks, well, you'd have been committing a social faux pas. It was like saying your favorite metal band is Motley Crue. Conversely, within academic communities, there was no quicker way to lose your social standing or even your consideration for that teaching position than to show up to the lecture hall with a t-shirt that says Iron Maiden. My friends, things are changing, and for the better, and you're all a part of it. So the merging of metal and academia has too many positive effects to list. But one of the first I'd like to discuss is the elevated metal conversation. Heavy metal conversation is coming a long way. The fact that we're all here tonight having these conversations is very meaningful to me, because at one time, the notion of heavy metal conversations brought to mind images such as this. Now, in all fairness, this is satire. But as the saying goes, there is truth in jest. There was a certain moment on this program that I remember where Black Sabbath was doing a televised performance. There was a clip from the early 70s, and the conversation went something like this.
This kicks ass.
Yeah, these guys rule.
Are these guys from Seattle?
No, you dumbass. They're American. Although this dialogue portrays great stupidity, there's actually great intelligence behind it, as is the case with the writers of most good satire. But as with any art form that achieves wide-reaching audiences, whether a TV show or a musical act, there are those who don't really get it or get it for the wrong reasons, usually the most rudimentary attention-getting elements. This is an unfortunate side effect of mainstream success, which can be as much a curse as a blessing. I realize there are various ages of folks here, including some that may have been too young to remember when this show first appeared. But those who do may recall the incessant quoting at certain social gatherings of,
"Fire, fire! I am the great Cornholio. I need TP for my bunghole."
This sort of quoting and imitating out of context loses the essence of the big picture. And to use a term that's being thrown around quite a bit these days in the media, is a form of cultural appropriation. A later example of this, it doesn't relate to heavy metal, but it does relate to comedy and satire, is Dave Chappelle's show on the Comedy Central network, one of the most popular comedy series of all time. There was a portion of the audience who got the humor and could see the big picture of what he was satirizing. But far too many mainstream viewers became fans that couldn't get past the basics, quoting the rudimentary catchphrases like, "I'm Rick James, bitch," as well as some of his more controversial moments, which, quoted out of context, went from being clever, racially charged humor to sounding racist. It was no wonder Chappelle walked away from a mega hit show and multi-million-dollar deal. Here's an example that does relate more directly to heavy metal. This involves a personal hero of mine, Eddie Van Halen. Although the band Van Halen lyrically is not considered heavy metal, sonically, Eddie Van Halen defines heavy metal. Ask any of us who do this for a living. The late Dimebag Darrell said as much and happens to be buried with one of Van Halen's guitars. My friend Scott Ian, who's going to speak for all of you tomorrow, knows a thing or two about heavy metal guitar tone. He will tell you the exact same thing. Ask him. So in addition to inspiring myself and countless others who went on to forge our own identities in music, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for this guy. Eddie spawned a legion of imitators who seemed to miss the big picture of his artistry. Innovation, spontaneity, riffs, dynamics, feel. I'm going to play you a couple examples, if that's okay with you. So Van Halen got very pigeonholed in the 80s and 90s, mainly because of this innovation. It's a very cool thing, but there was so much more to him than that. I mean, this is a guy, he was the first guy I ever heard do stuff like this. Right? Those are harmonics, those of you who are guitar players. Or using all these chime-sounding things. Yet nobody talks about that. Or some of the rhythm stuff, his riffs. Now here's a couple of my favorite Van Halen moments. Okay? That's some cool shit, right? Thank you. Yet somehow, Van Halen spawned all these imitators, and all they do is this. All right, here's another medley of Van Halen. Okay, so right there's a really interesting thing. I've studied a lot of guitar players. I've never seen anybody else do this. Most of us play scales, right? Even non-musicians know a scale as, right, or. No, I think Van Halen's a mad genius. I really do. He claims not to know any scales, and I believe him. Because he came up with licks like this. The thing I just played. Right? What the hell is that? He's just taking the same pattern and just moving across the neck and somehow making it work. He did that in this. Right? There's many examples of that where he, in that same song. So anyway, the innovations of Van Halen are incredible, yet it all got reduced to these catchphrases, these two-handed licks, which is great. They were great, but taken out of context, they were like the equivalent of Dave Chappelle jokes or Beavis and Butthead quotes taken out of context. So it's almost no wonder that there was this rebellion against that kind of guitar playing, which is unfortunate because even today, at least in the US, solos have largely disappeared from hard rock, which is crazy. I mean, that's such a part of what was so great about rock and roll was the solo. So yeah, my point here is to demonstrate mainstream appropriation and the dumbed down stereotype. So Beavis and Butthead, back to those crazy guys, through no fault of the show itself, it contributed to the stereotype for heavy metal conversation. And there's actually nothing wrong with speaking like that if you're a preteen. Many of us did, including guys I know who've gone on to have advanced careers and professional careers and advanced degrees. But a lot of us related to that as preteens. Unfortunately, it fed into a stereotype, one that I think we're all helping to break by organizing like this. And this stereotype was already pervasive in the media. I want to give you a few examples of those. So I grew up with these advertisements that would really talk down to metalheads. It was like we were the biggest bunch of schmucks. One of the biggest offenders was Guitar Center, the biggest store in the United States. That's me on the cover of the catalog. I'm grateful for the support I've gotten from Guitar Center, but so I don't want to come down too hard on them. But as a kid, I would cringe at these ads. Musicians. Guitar Center presents the Metal-thon. Boss Metal Zone pedal on sale. The Kerry King BC Rich guitar. Fender, Gibson, Marshall. Not 10, not 20, but 30% off. Guitar Center's Metal-thon sale this weekend. Now, even worse were the ads for upcoming metal concerts. In fact, I think the voiceover must have been the same guy. You know, it's kind of like with movies, right? All the movie previews have that guy. He is one man alone in a world gone mad. So it's always that voice. So the same guy that did the Guitar Center ads, musicians. I'll never forget this one. Metalheads. This Friday at the Cow Palace, San Francisco. Dio. With special guests. Megadeth.
What do you mean I don't believe in God?
The Cow Palace, one night only. The heaviest tour of the season. The heaviest night of your life. There you go. So I was in high school when I was a target demographic of these advertisers. As an adult, as a metal musician, I had to participate in this in the form of radio IDs. I'll never forget doing a show called Metal Shop, and the slogan was, the only show with teeth. Hi, this is Alex Skolnick, and you're listening to Metal Shop, the only show with teeth. Clearly my proudest career moment. So while this is a stereotype, and it still exists, but thankfully there has been a change. One of the most high-profile representations of metal in the media is one that it's been around a few years. I've appeared on it recently, That Metal Show, with these guys, Eddie Trunk, Don Jameson, and Jim Florentine. And these guys are probably the most visible representatives of metal discourse, at least in the US. And what I love about them is that they aren't trying to pander to metalheads like those old radio ads with the ridiculous voices. They also don't get overly decked out in metal clothing like other television hosts from days past, I won't name. These guys know if they tried to dress up in too much leather and stuff, they look ridiculous. And they look like what they are, which is basically normal, everyday guys from Jersey. Ed, Don, and Jim have raised the level of metal conversation from the Beavis and Butthead stereotype and the pandering to from advertisers to something a bit more like sports talk radio. Coincidentally, these guys are all big sports fans. That Metal Show resembles a sports show with analysis and predictions applied to metal artists instead of athletes. Which brings up an interesting point. Did you ever notice that for some reason, sport fandom has never suffered the indignity of being defined and stereotyped in the media the way metal has? Everyone knows sports fans include some of the most vile, obnoxious specimens of humankind. Here in Europe, you have the football hooligans. In the US, we have the equivalent for American football, hockey, basketball, baseball. In fact, if there's anyone who takes your football hooligans to task, it's some of our baseball fans, specifically fans of the Boston Red Sox. So how come the world of sports gets a pass in the media and is treated by mainstream culture as something far more worthy of respect than metal? Sports, which includes not only fans that are an embarrassment to the human species, but those at every level who are corrupt and in some cases evil. Look at FIFA. Look how many of them got arrested last week. I look at how many high-profile athletes, especially the ones propped up as role models and model citizens by mainstream media and society, get revealed as liars and cheats. Lance Armstrong, Tom Brady, Barry Bonds. Some of these guys are murderers. Murderers! Aaron Hernandez, Oscar Pistorius, O.J. fucking Simpson. Yet sports continues to get a pass, and metalheads get equated with meatheads. My theory on this can be summed up in two parts. First, mainstream media recognizes that sports fans consist not only of the degenerate dregs like this, but a broad range of educational levels, socioeconomic classes, and personality types. For example, British football may draw its share of hooligans, but it also counts among its fans plenty of average, everyday, law-abiding folk, including some very dignified and respectable humans, such as acclaimed novelist and essayist Nick Hornby, who's even written a best-selling book about his passion for the sport, Fever Pitch. And I may pick on fans of the Boston Red Sox, but in fairness, they're not limited to those beer-swilling buffoons. They too draw plenty of decent, everyday, generally law-abiding Bostonians. They even count among their diehard fans such folks as the uber-academic appellate lawyer, celebrity attorney, and Harvard law professor Alan Dershowitz. Alan Dershowitz even has a sandwich named after him at Fenway Park called the Dersh. My friends, the preceding rant is there to help point out the second part of my theory, which is that, unlike metal, sports has a social acceptance, which, all things considered, makes sense given how much longer it's been around. The fact that sports fandom is so wide-ranging and diverse is recognized by propagators of the media narrative. Metal, meanwhile, faces the challenge of not only being pigeonholed, stereotyped, and condescended to, but defined by its fringe elements, whether fictional, such as Beavis and Butthead, or actual, such as those captured in documentaries like Heavy Metal Parking Lot or Decline of Western Civilization Part 2. So I am grateful to that metal show and others, Metal Evolution, Martin, who's here today, who are helping to lift metal's representation in the media to a level of respect more in line with that of sports. And as much as I love Ed, Don, and Jim, sometimes I wonder, what about the level beyond sports talk? Topics such as which album's better, Kiss Alive 1 or Alive 2? Which live concert is more awesome, Rob Zombie or Marilyn Manson? Coolest metal mascot in the throwdown tonight? It's all well and good. But what about deeper questions, such as, is the popularity of metal, with its intensity and themes of violence, representative of a primitive instinct long repressed by civilized society? What effect has metal had on populations living under totalitarian dictatorships and oppressive regimes? Is the imagery of the human female as a statuesque nemesis that must be tamed and conquered, as depicted by certain hard rock and metal bands, indicative of a deep-rooted Freudian sense of male inferiority? How does the proceeding relate to the 80s glam metal movement and its plays on gender identity? And is the sexually charged lifestyle lived and expressed in rock and metal, including musicians who date strippers and porn stars, evidence of a genetic predisposition as indicated in recent scientific studies? These are topics I'm interested in, but I'd get some very funny looks if I were to bring this up on that metal show. Yet, thanks to all of you, there is now a community where we can have these sorts of conversations. And one day, the rest of the world will catch on and realize something we've known all along. Metal fans, like sports fans, include a broad range of educational levels and socioeconomic classes. Metal fans, like sports fans, are not just alcohol-guzzling, profanity-spewing rabble-rousers. And metal fans go completely against stereotype. As further evidence, I now present to you a segment on unexpected metalheads. So a few years ago, I began a series of blog posts in which I asked questions of unexpected metalheads. These are all folks whose appreciation and knowledge of metal is in line with anyone here, and myself. I'm just going to scroll through them really quick and then scroll back. Okay? Okay, this is Shemen. She's a gate agent for Delta Airlines. I met her at LAX airport when I was having a really bad day. I had driven overnight. I looked and felt terrible. I was desperate for a rest and seeking the free refreshments in the Delta Lounge. I couldn't get in because my credit card wasn't working. I was told I could call the credit card company for verification, but my phone was out of juice. So exhausted and unshaven, I began trolling the floor of the airport, crawling underneath tables, desperately looking for an outlet. There'd been a recent bomb threat at LAX, So as Shemin approached me in her uniform, I was certain I was about to be hauled off and questioned for suspicious behavior and possibly arrested. Instead, she said, "Excuse me, are you Alex Skolnick? I am a huge Testament fan. Could I have your picture?" So I made a deal with her. She got me into the lounge and even upgraded my flight. And anyway, she's wonderful. We kept in touch, and she completed my survey. So, but actually, the first guys that came to mind with the unexpected metalheads were these guys. They're based in Las Vegas, Nevada. They're part of a U.S. military aviation squadron called the Thunderbirds. They're kind of like the Blue Angels, very similar to the type portrayed in the iconic 80s Tom Cruise movie, Top Gun. Except back then, Top Gun guys were not metalheads. It would have been unheard of. Nowadays, they go to metal shows, and in this case, they graciously invited the whole band to see the planes and tour the headquarters. And this is my most recent subject, Shayna. She's a physician certified in emergency medicine and medical toxology, as well as an assistant professor at Oregon Health and Science University. And then the last guy is Jonathan, whom I consider the poster boy for unexpected metalheads. He's a practicing attorney and executive recruiter for Fortune 500 companies. We don't have time to go through everybody's answers. There's links to most of them on my website. But for now, I'm going to focus on these second two, as they are both occupations my parents would have preferred me to go into, a doctor or a lawyer. Okay, so Shayna first got into metal in 7th grade. She says, when a lot of kids first start defining their identities by their taste in music is junior high school. I went to a small, snooty, homogenous private school from 6th through 12th grade. I was just becoming invested in the notion that I was different from a lot of the other kids. And Justice for All made the rounds. Question, what is it about metal that is meaningful to you? Answer, metal is so visceral and passionate. As a generally well-behaved, scholastically high-performing, sensitive girl, metal helped me tap into this balls-out, manly energy that's exactly opposite from how I'd naturally move through the world. Metal and moshing in particular always unleashed something that couldn't get out elsewhere in my life. I once subjected my whole entire high school to a modern dance performance, dancing to Hollow by Pantera in 10th grade dance recital. All the other girls danced to Ottmar Liebert and weird adult easy listening crap. Question, how do you feel being into metal affects you as a person? Does it give you a different outlook and perspective? How? Answer, I'm the kind of person who has always taken a bit of pride into being something that most other people aren't. Being into metal can be a real anchor for that. Question, if you had to tell someone else about why you love metal, what would you say? Answer, I would tell them that metal can't be understood. It has to be felt. And then I'd turn on something really loud and start punching the air. Question, how has being metal changed your outlook or perspective on day-to-day living? The metal attitude gives me confidence and a sense of humor, particularly in my job. Metal reminds me not to take things too seriously, even though a lot of metal is very serious, because you get to be super freaking serious listening to all those crazy intricate chords and lyrics for a hot moment, but then you can reset yourself and get back to the business at hand. That's the biggest thing metal does for me. It turns the world and my brain off, which is what I need. Question, did you ever look like a typical metal fan? If so, how old were you and what made you change your mind? No, not really. There are pictures of me from high school surrounded by dudes with stringy hair and torn jeans and concert t-shirts. I'm always sort of standing there smiling like I could be anywhere at a football game or something. Even when I got totally decked out, I somehow never could pull off the look of a metal chick. Question, does being into metal affect your career in any way? Do you bring a metal quality to your work? Answer, indirectly, definitely. I call the ER, the emergency room, the mosh pit of medicine. Also, by choosing the two areas of specialization that I did, emergency medicine and toxicology, I feel as if I've basically legitimized an expertise in sex, drugs, and rock and roll. As a toxicologist, I now have nearly free reign to display skulls and crossbones pretty much anywhere I want to. Question, do you ever feel a conflict between your inner metalhead and your non-metal surroundings? Answer, I wouldn't call it a conflict, but there's definitely a bit of a split personality that develops. To be totally honest, and this makes me a bit sad, I haven't found a lot of places where it's easy to be simultaneously metal and also intellectual intelligent. I went to a prep school growing up and a liberal arts school for undergrad. Let's just say I was always going to the metal shows by myself. Later in my 20s, I worked in music. She's worked for some high-profile record labels. And I was finally surrounded by metal like I wanted to be. I had some phenomenal metal friends, but not many of them understood or related to my struggle, having come from a hyper-intellectual background and wanting a more meaningful service-oriented profession. That's why I'm super into this idea of metal academics. Okay, so that's Shayna. She just filled this survey out very recently. This one was done a few years ago. This is Jonathan. Jonathan's now 39, Cleveland Heights, Ohio. He's an attorney and executive recruiter, licensed to practice law in Maryland, Virginia, DC, Ohio, and New Jersey. Got his undergraduate from University of Michigan and a law degree from Columbus School of Law in 1998. So what is it about metal that is meaningful to you? I love the sophistication of the music and its aggressiveness. It's an ideal and safe outlet for stress relief. Metal was also the conduit to my true love, which is playing metal and rock guitar. Without metal, I never would have been inspired to play guitar, which is a source of pride that I carry with me in my personal and professional life. Question, how do you feel being into metal affects you as a person? Does it give you a different outlook and perspective? Answer, I think metal provides me with an outlet for the rigors of everyday life and access to a community of passionate fans. Question, if you had to tell somebody else why you love metal, what would you say? As I try to explain to my wife, I love the musical complexity, I love the passion, and I love the gamut of topics that songs cover, from politics, such as Megadeth, to literary references of Iron Maiden, to the fantasy escapism of Dio. Question, how has being metal changed your outlook or perspective on day-to-day living? It's expanded my interests and made me into a more well-rounded person. Hearing Churchill's speech on the intro to Aces High got me interested in Winston Churchill's life and writings, which I still rely on as sources of inspiration. Hearing Yngwie Malmsteen made me want to learn more about classical music. Question, did you ever look like a typical metal fan? If so, how old were you and what made you change? Oh yeah, I tried to grow my hair out in high school. The problem is that my Judaic roots interfered, and I wound up with a funky Jew fro with 2 tufts of hair growing in the back that my mom referred to as wings. I wanted to look like Nick Bocott from Grim Reaper. Instead, I looked like Dr. J. I can kind of relate, but I found ways to manage the Jew fro. Instead, I had a denim jacket with the patches, a leather jacket, and enough metal t-shirts to clothe a small third world country. Question, does being into metal affect your career in any way? In other words, do you bring a metal quality to your work? Absolutely. I think the 2 elements of metal that I find most prevalent, patent aggression and musical sophistication, are good principles in the business world. Controlled aggression and professional sophistication go hand in hand. Go after your goals, but be smart about it. Also, as I said above, metal inspired me to play guitar, which I've been involved in for 20 years now. Whatever proficiency I had obtained is a source of great pride for me and something I carry with me personally and professionally. Last question. Do you ever feel a conflict between your inner metalhead and your non-metal surroundings? Not at all. I think everyone has a little metal in them. So that's Jonathan. So, finally, I'd like to talk a little bit about myself. I want to make sure I'm not running over on time because we're going to open up the floor to questions. There's Tony. 45 minutes to go. 45 minutes to go? Okay, great. This should work out just right. So, did you guys enjoy the unexpected metalheads? Cool. All right, so if you're not familiar with my story, you may be wondering, what is my connection to academia? Well, I've actually written about it extensively in my book called Geek to Guitar Hero. I unfortunately do not have copies because I'm currently on tour as we speak, but you can purchase them on my website. Last fall, I did a presentation at Metal and Cultural Impact in Dayton, Ohio, hosted by our friend Brian over here. And that presentation is as long as this entire talk that I've just done. So what I'm going to do now is literally skim through a few fine points. Consider this the extremely abridged version. I was not a happy kid, except when I wore my KISS shirt. As a preteen, I felt lost, isolated, and confused, except when I played guitar. My father is considered a preeminent scholar of criminal sociology. He and my mother, a research psychologist and fellow Yale PhD, begrudgingly put up with my musical interests. One former student of my father compared him to Sigmund Freud, at least in his specific field of social science. You might detect a slight resemblance. Although I was expected to become, quote unquote, educated, my experiences in the public school system left me wanting no part of it. And it wasn't just the educational system that made no sense, it was intellectualism, or at least how it appeared to me, academic fundamentalism. I can recall many conversations among my parents and their friends about being academic. Who attended the latest faculty party? Who was up for an award for distinguished achievement? Whose kid just got accepted to Stanford? Yet very few about the wonders of the academic subjects themselves. Ironically, years later, I'd find myself in a similar situation with heavy metal, surrounded by people obsessed with the process of being metal and feeling the need to prove how metal they were, yet feeling equally out of place among them because my focus was on the art of making music. In both cases, academia and metal, it was always the posturing and lifestyle elements I couldn't relate to. Not helping my perception of intellectualism was the fact that the television in our household was rarely tuned to anything fun. It was mostly these public affairs programs featuring intellectuals. The thing about these shows, it was always the same. The outfits were the same. The tone of voice was the same, just monotone, painfully boring. In fact, it was so boring, I'm going to reenact one broadcast for you, just so you can experience what this was like. On Capitol Hill this week, the head of the Senate Judiciary Committee, who says he's undecided about confirmation, questioned the presidential nominee on his philosophy of original intent, that the Constitution ought to be strictly interpreted in the manner in which the framers intended. The senator said that philosophy does not appear to correlate with the nominee's support of the 1954 Supreme Court decision overturning the Board of Education's poll. You guys still with me? Now, I'm sure these people were talking about very important issues, but as a little kid, this was absolute torture. So there should be no question about why. Years later, I discovered this instrument, and it all started with this image right here. Okay, is it any wonder that this thing here is called a power chord? Because for the first time in my life, I felt a sense of power. And I was motivated. I actually had a true incentive to learn something, not based on parents, teachers, or anyone else's expectations. Learning this instrument immediately got my brain doing things it had been resisting in school, such as engaging in systems of organization, memorizing basic formulas and patterns, appreciating historical and cultural foundations. Why? Again, I had an incentive. Many years later, I would study jazz and receive a degree from the New School in New York. One of my teachers would be a great pianist named Richie Byrock. On his first day, he stormed into the room, pounded the piano, and said, "If you remember one thing from this class, remember these words. Expression is everything." So to me, this word, expression, captures what had been missing in my life up to that point. It's what was missing in the intellectuals, both the ones on TV and the ones I was around. It was largely why I was drawn to music and the guitar. And ironically, it was this instrument and the craft of music, the very things most frowned upon by my parents and teachers, that actually instilled a love of learning, gave me confidence and the tools needed to succeed in the world. I've come up with a name for what I experienced. I call it louder education. Louder Education became the basis of a web series hosted by myself and my friend Chris Harfinist, known as Tomato, who runs a rock school in New York. We interviewed metal musicians and media personalities in front of a group of young music students. This is us with a few of our guests. Going clockwise, the late Dave Brockie of Guar, may he rest in peace. Rob Cavastani from Death Angel. Jose Mangin, the radio host from the popular Liquid Metal show on Sirius XM. Richard Christie, who is a great death metal drummer who happens to be a Howard Stern sidekick. And finally, John Gallagher of the band Dying Fetus. These kids are encouraged to be expressive and creative. And that's a group of the kids right there. And it brings up a very important point. Why should this type of knowledge and experience be exclusive to hip after-school programs? I really wish I had had mentors like this when I was growing up. I believe there are ways to combine the independence, free thought, and here's that word again, expression, found in great music, and apply it to science, math, technology, history, and any other subject. A few of the most obvious and direct correlations. Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner by Samuel Taylor Coleridge. Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner by Iron Maiden. Tom Sawyer by Mark Twain. Tom Sawyer by Rush. For Whom the Bell Tolls by Ernest Hemingway. Duh. So this is Louder Education in a nutshell. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation. It's great to be here. Welcome to the conference. And now we open it up for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex.
Thanks, Tony.
Really entertaining. Yeah, we have a couple of mics here. Let's go ahead and mic the right team. First one there.
So I was just wondering, what are you doing with your unexpected metalhead interviews? What are you doing some research? Are you doing something else? What are you doing?
I don't know what I'm doing. Or you tell me, what should I do? I started this, I was blogging. And I was coming up with topics for my blog. I've been so busy with musical projects in the last year that I haven't been able to blog as much as I'd like. But these were just blog posts I did. And just very related. It was before I even knew there was a such thing as metal academia, let alone a community of metal academics. Now that there is, it does get me thinking, yeah, maybe I should do something. I'd like to interview more people. Maybe, I don't know, maybe this could be a book. But yeah, it's obviously, it's fun and it's very relatable. And I think I'd like to do more with it. I just need help figuring out what to do.
Yeah, I'm sure we will help you. It's like,
Okay.
go write a paper with Alex. Wouldn't that be cool? Yeah. Yes.
Before I ask my question, I just wanted to say, because my twin would kill me if I didn't say this, we saw you play in Houston in 2010. This is just as awesome, although a lot different. Because the lead guy from Exodus isn't telling everyone to kill each other, so I like this a little more. I'm curious if you think your awareness of this higher or more sophisticated discourse around metal, if you think it corresponds with social media and these new technologies in the last, 5 or 10 years that help people connect and converse with virtually, as opposed to being, like you mentioned, blogging, and I know that you're very active on Twitter as well. If you think, I don't know what your experience and becoming aware of this discourse that you've been looking for, if you think it corresponds with having more access to the conversations people are having about metal, or if you think it was always out there, you just hadn't found it yet.
Yeah, I think it's one of the great ironies of the modern age is technology. Technology has made things possible that are unimaginable. Technology is being used for the advancement of humankind. It's also being used to show drunk frat boy photos. And cat videos. Nothing against cat videos. And in music, I think, we've seen a similar thing. Yeah, for me, it connects to that word again, expression. How do I think? Because you tend to be pigeonholed. It's something I've wrestled with for years, being part of a semi-high-profile band. When I have other interests, musical as well as otherwise. I just did a world music album last year that's getting great reviews, but I have a platform now. I can talk about this. Hey, here's something I do. My jazz albums, the same thing. And even just opinions. I'm not limited to something I say in an interview that gets printed in a magazine, maybe even misprinted or misquoted. So I think the technology's helped in all those ways, and it's made things like this possible. I was able to come up with the unexpected metalheads concept because people have computers and internet service, so they're reading this. I can't imagine it otherwise. I mean, I guess in the pre-internet era, I probably could have put out a book, but it would have been much harder. I would have been having to travel and take pictures instead of having people email pictures. So it's been great in a lot of ways, but then the technology is hurtful sometimes too. I think it's hurt the quality of music. That's not the fault of the people that created the technology, but those that abuse it. How many the state of, not so much the state of metal. I mean, I think there's more metal that actually has natural energy than say like dance pop music. At one time, pop music, there was a lot of good pop music at one time. And if you listen to what's in the top 20 of pop music, it's so technological and just so unhuman. And then, of course, there's file sharing and lack of album sales. That's a whole other discussion. But yeah, again, I think just to get back to your question, I think a lot of what I'm able to engage in is possible through technology. So I'm grateful. I like the current technological state of things much better than before. Oh, and then one other thing I'll bring up. You know, I'm on a 5-week tour right now. A lot of times we're stuck in a venue or a festival somewhere, and you know, you used to feel so disconnected from the rest of the world, and now you can just send an email. It's really made touring a lot better. Okay. Sorry for the long-winded answer. That's a heavy subject.
Thanks a lot. In your unexpected metalhead segment, I noticed something interesting in the two that you went into detail on. And that is that one of them mentioned, well, the woman mentioned, Shayna, I think, mentioned that she listens to metal in part to turn off her brain. And so for her, listening to metal is a bodily and emotional activity.
Yeah,
The
it's a stress
second
reliever.
person stressed the complexity of metal, and for him it seemed like listening to metal was much more of an intellectual activity that sort of took him out of the banality of everyday existence, whereas for Shayna it provided an escape almost from her
That's an
the
interesting
intellectual
observation.
requirements
Yes.
of her life. And so I was wondering, vis-a-vis your whole position of the pigeonholed use of butthead, metalhead, and metal academia, if you had any further thoughts on that.
That's a very interesting point. It's a good observation, and I hadn't thought about that point. I think I think it probably has to do with occupation. Yes, Shayna may be listening to turn off her brain at times, but she also has a very stressful job. Yeah, she works in the ER. So she's dealing with emergencies, and she has to be spot on all the time. Whereas Jonathan, it's not that he doesn't use thought. He obviously strategizes and for his executive recruiting and his legal cases, but if he drops the ball, somebody doesn't die. So I think they have different. Yeah, I guess they have different approaches of listening because they have different, very different stress levels in their. That's my theory about it anyway. But it's a good point. I'd actually like to think about it some more.
Next one, Sarah.
Yes,
Yeah.
hello.
Hey.
Yeah.
Am I? Okay. Thanks for your presentation. A question regarding your early influences. You state very openly Kiss. And their band sometimes doesn't receive a lot of respect musically and for other reasons, including in this community, I would argue. Yet yourself, Scott Newman of Anthrax, and many others, particularly the guitarists that came of age in the 1980s, will cite Kiss. Can you talk more about them, why they were important to you and your peers?
Did you see their Kiss's Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction?
Yes.
By Tom Morello inducted them.
Yes.
Not exactly a metal knucklehead. He's actually, yeah, he's actually a Harvard graduate. And I think his speech perfectly encapsulated what Kiss meant for so many of us. I want to watch that speech again because it was so inspiring. Even Gene Simmons was nearly moved to tears. Those guys could not be more at odds politically. I don't know what it is. I think it's something that I don't think it can ever be replicated. I think, I have a few theories about it, and I don't want to keep us here all night. I could really go on about it. I have a theory. I think they have, some of the music, was really good. Right? There are Kiss albums that all Kiss fans can agree on. Those songs I played. What did I play? Deuce, Detroit Rock City, and a couple others. I think they screwed up and made some great rock and roll. I don't think they would, I really think you can see by the activity for the last 20 years or so. It's a business. It's marketing. That's where Gene's head is at. And I believe as part of marketing, this is just a guess. He may have said, okay, you know, we need the best, we need to make a great rock and roll record. Okay, we're going to do Destroyer. We're going to get Bob Ezrin, who produced Pink Floyd and Alice Cooper. He was a great, great producer. And he helped them make a great album. And some of the drums weren't always cutting it. The drummer, Anton Fig, who's just an amazing, not just amazing, he's an amazing guy. Like, he's a very active musician outside of the Letterman show. I just did a show with him and an Indian guitarist a couple months ago, right before I hit the road. And yeah, I was a little starstruck, but yeah, I have friends that play with him. He's like a active New York musician. But I know for a fact he was called in on certain Kiss sessions. So they made these great albums, and it was almost an accident that so many of us became attached, not just to the music, but to what they represented. They were a lot of what I was talking about, expression, not just through sound, but through colors, you know, the Kiss sign, you know. And then, you know, then there were things about them that, you know, you grow up and you realize, okay, maybe yeah, not everything about Kiss is something to be proud of. Like, yeah, I'll never forget realizing that the lyrics for Love Gun, realizing what that was about. Yeah, because I was like 10 when that came. I just didn't make the connection. Oh, Love Gun. This is kind of a phallic metaphor. Oh, I get it. Yeah. And then you think about if you recite the lyrics, like if you recite lyrics by Bono, Leonard Cohen, or Bob Dylan, that's one thing. It sounds like poetry. If you recite lyrics by Kiss, I really love you, baby. I love what you got. Let's get together. We can get hot. No place for hiding, baby. Nowhere to run. You pulled the trigger of my love gun. So, you know, there were these cringeworthy elements, but I think a lot of us were so young at the time, it didn't matter. And I think Kiss, original Kiss, and those of us that grew up and got attracted to it, it's a phenomenon that I don't think will ever happen again. You could probably write a book just in answer to your question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Do you see if there's going to be any change in the path for new bands to get established? It seems it used to be artists could become, you know, famous, but now they have to be business people as well. It's a real struggle for new bands to be famous and thrive.
Yeah, well, I think you're right. It's kind of the norm now. Well, there was a paradigm. Like there were gatekeepers back then, which in a way was, you know, it had good points. There was something to be said for quality control. Now, pretty much anybody can put out a video, anybody can make an album. It's very hard to sift through all the music that's coming out and realize what's good and what's not. But usually, you know, if the music is good and then word of mouth spreads and the band is smart about promotion and business, you know, then they have a chance. I mean, there are bands that are sort of, you're seeing bands rise. It's not unheard of. I mean, what does tend to happen is you discover a new band and you realize they're actually not really a new band. Like, you know, I had a whole hiatus from metal when I did jazz, mostly jazz in the 90s to like the early 2000s. And then one of the things that pulled me back into metal was I got a call to do a guest solo on this album by this new band called Lamb of God. And then, Lamb of God starts building, but it turns out that they're not that new. Right? And also, I joined my band, I was the kid, I was 16 when I joined. They were all in their early 20s. So my peer group was more like the Lamb of God guys. And it turns out they had been doing it nearly as long. They formed a few years after Testament. They've been around, but by the time they really started developing and things started happening, it just took that long. And I think if you look at a lot of bands, I think of Arch Enemy as a new band. I would look at it, wow, this is a great new band with this great new singer, but it turns out they've been around. They had a whole other singer before. There's all this history. And actually, it was even, we tend to forget too that it wasn't unheard of a long time ago either. I mean, even among, more mainstream hard rock bands, for example, Journey was basically a prog band. There are several Journey albums now that don't even have vocals. It's just like, it's great stuff, but commercially, not a chance. And they kind of went the extreme, they did the other extreme. They went very commercial. But they have this whole history before the Journey that we all know about. And there's a lot of other examples like that. Next question.
I have a quick question. In what other ways, aside from that metal show or, Sirius XM's liquid metal or I'll listen to it was Heart Attack, do you think that the discourse of dumbed down stereotype is changing? At home, our local music store's got Rockin' Rick from Axe Music, it's that total, exactly what you were saying used to be, still is. So I guess that's my question is how do you feel that the discourse of that is changing the way that dumb down stereotypes?
Okay. Well, I don't think it's changing fast enough. But it exists outside of metal too. Look at how popular wrestling is. And then that I don't know if I'm not a wrestling fan, but I don't know if you are a wrestling fan. I don't know if you'd want it to be smart and dumb. So I think that style, it exists, and there's a lot of entertainment out there that's not that smart. Look at Adam Sandler movies. Why are they so popular? And I think he's a very good comedian. I mean, I think Opera Man on Saturday Night Live is brilliant. The Hanukkah song. He's actually a great comedian, but he makes these dumb movies, and they do so well. And then I think there's dumbness in our culture. Look at, I will not mention her name because I despise everything. But the woman married to the rapper who goes on stage and steals the thunder of other musicians. You know what? God, she who shall not be named. Look at the popularity. Why is she so popular? Why? So the dumbing down. I think there's just been a dumbing down of the entire culture, unfortunately. And metal is just a scapegoat.
Hello, Alex. This is a good topic to segue from the last one perfectly. I've been fortunate enough to see your jazz trio several times, and it occurs to me that you've taken some metal attitude and perspective and brought it into that project. And you didn't speak much about it in this presentation, but I'd just like to ask if you could touch upon it, because it kind of relates to a lot of things that we're talking about. The audience for the trio is very sophisticated. The whole attitude surrounding that style of music is absolutely sophisticated.
Thank you.
But the arrangements and the tunes, some of the tunes you guys decided to play are, remakes or rearrangements of our favorite songs, and so it's kind of tied into a degree, in my opinion. So I just wanted to ask about that.
Oh, thank you. Well, it's, I have so much I can talk about. I love, I'm grateful for the opportunity to come here and talk, and I really had to be selective about what I talk about. If I start talking about, my experience in the jazz community, where I not only have my own jazz trio, but it was born out of being in a jazz community, living in New York, and there's some interesting dynamics there. Some of them tend to mirror heavy metal, certainly not sonically, but you can see some of the same sort of behaviors as far as, there's a right way to be metal, there's a right way to be jazz, right? And if you go against those stereotypes, you're making waves. It's pretty fascinating. I came up with the idea of doing a jazz guitar trio where I arrange heavy metal songs, as well as doing originals with my own, that capture my personality. Largely because I'd spent a few years just starting over and just playing jazz guitar and being around these people that, they were sort of following the paradigm, which is, you listen to this artist, whether it's, Duke Ellington, or, if you're a guitarist now. But when I was getting my music degree, there was a guitarist who's still around. He's very popular. He's young. His name's Kurt Rosenwinkel. He's a great guitar player. But it just reminded me of the way everybody was sort of mimicking Van Halen, like I talked about, and just sort of only focusing on certain things. And you had Van Halen clones in the rock guitar world. Later you had Satriani clones, Steve Vai clones. In jazz, it was the same thing. You had Kurt Rosenwinkel clones. It's a much smaller group. I don't know if anybody even knows that name, but if I was talking to if this were a group based more on jazz than metal, everybody would know what I'm talking about. So I just realized one day, I totally respect this guy's playing. I think he's incredible, but I don't want to play like that. I'm not going to play like that. I'm not him. And it was very similar to what I went through with rock and metal. Like I always wanted to learn the Van Halen stuff. Obviously, I know it. I can play it, but I didn't try to be a clone. And I learned my Yngwie licks, but I didn't try to be an Yngwie clone. So with jazz, I realized the musicians that really stood out brought something of their own personality to it. So Pat Metheny, for example, one of my favorite guitarists, jazz artist, total genius musician. He's from the Midwest. So if you listen to his records, he has this folk Midwest quality in a lot of his music. Herbie Hancock came from playing funk and R&B. And so he brought that to his. So I think everything as a musical improviser, outside of playing heavy metal, this whole other world opened up for me where I realized if I take, okay, where do I come from? I come from there. And I just found ways to bring it in terms of arrangements of the tunes and certain styles of guitar licks. Sonically, I never wanted to go for like a metal sound doing jazz improvisation. I figured that's been done, but I did the opposite. I took like a traditional jazz guitar sound, or like a Wes Montgomery, Jim Hall sound. And what would that sound like playing a melody by Kiss with a Scorpion? It was fun, and done a bunch of these albums. I'm now a lot more focused on originals, but the appreciation that I've gotten for that is great, including some people that, I've had some press and just appreciation from folks in the jazz world that don't know any of my metal work that can relate to it. I'm sure there's plenty of them that think I'm crazy, but I guess the way I looked at it was playing metal guitar requires a lot of work, a lot of technical proficiency. I like to listen to a lot of different kinds of music, so as long as I'm working so hard on being proficient on this instrument, why should I limit it to one style of music?
Thank you.
Yeah, this is Niall. Actually, follow-up question, but because this is a very personal observation, but if really looking at like musicians who play something and attending a conference or doing metal studies, I think most of them are actually guitar players. And I also noticed when I interviewed the artist and talk about these issues about them, and most of them were also guitar players. And I was thinking that, what is actually, what does it mean? Is it because guitar is a sort of complex instrument? Yeah, of course, drums, it's not easy to play drums, so it's not easy to sing, but you see much less drummers or singers in these metal academia circles. Just observation, I could be totally wrong, but that's what I've noticed. So I guess, do you think that there is something in the personality, or it's just some kind of overall attitude that these people are interested in finding out more about things?
It's an interesting point. I know plenty of guitar players that would not be able to sit in this room. They would just not. They would just say, "What the hell are these guys talking about?" But like I pointed out in the presentation, at least learning the instrument required these this sort of processing of information and developing it. And there's probably a lot of us for whom that process connects to beyond the guitar and beyond music and into other subjects. Certainly not everybody, but I think I think in order to play this thing well, and hopefully I play it well, I make a living at it, I assume I play it well. It required this period of just so much focus, where it's just all about guitar. And then at a certain point you've got your momentum. It's ingrained, and you have all this this whole learning process. But you don't want to limit it to guitar. You don't want to just limit it to music. In my case, when I went back to school, I happened to study jazz. I got my degree in jazz because that was really what I was feeling at the time. I didn't know that I was going to end up back in playing metal again. I always thought it was a possibility. I didn't know it at the time, and I was open to going into different directions. I was studying literature at the same time, philosophy. And, I'm sure there is a correlation, and the creative part of playing. That definitely relates.
Probably another topic to study. Yeah, Niall.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Thanks very much for your talk.
Absolutely, thank you.
I have a question that's for me, and it's got to do with academia guitar criticism. So our main mode of criticism over this week and so is going to be verbal, or it's going to be written. But I was wondering about metal's critical edge in terms of the sound, and whether or not you've ever thought about the sonic sound, the sonic relationship of criticism to language. So when does your guitar sound critical? In like the way punk allies itself with politics, not just in its verbal expression, but its sonic effect. Is there, and you played examples of pop metal, if you like, which aren't very critical in the sonic effect. Do you think there is a metal sound that sounds critical?
Oh, that's interesting. Well, I think it evolves. You know, I think when I guess the original wave thrash metal happened in the early to mid '80s, at least the way we know it. You know, there's some people say, you know, you've got this big four. You know, your band should really be part of the big four. I disagree. I remember being in 10th grade and these albums came out. You know, Anthrax, Metallica, Megadeth. And at that time, that was a very new sound. And it felt like it had a protest element. I think, you know, Megadeth ended up being more about political protest. But there was a sense that when it started, part of what they were protesting was, and it's interesting too because the Bay Area is considered this epicenter of the thrash movement. But yeah, three of the major bands, actually all the big four bands are not from the Bay Area. You know, I mean, Metallica relocated there, but the core of Metallica was really a guy from Copenhagen and a guy from outside of LA, and they were based in LA. Megadeth was based in LA. Slayer was based in LA. So I think they were protesting what was happening in LA, which was Motley Crue, Rat, you know, bands that you probably may not remember, Leatherwolf. Keel, you know, there was this whole period of bands that was the LA sound. And I remember, you know, when Guns N' Roses came out, it was just like, oh, at first, not another one of these LA bands. And then, of course, you know, they sounded completely different. So I think the original thrash guitar sound was large. Yeah, you could maybe connect it to protest, as a protest to what was happening in LA. Now that sound, you know, I talked in my presentation about things being adapted by the mainstream. You know, you have that same sound, a very similar sound. You know, Linkin Park, for example, very Nickelback, even, right? It's that tone. We may not like the bands as much, but it's almost like the sound was sampled from that, and then placed in, placed into this other context, appropriated. So now it's not protesting anything, you know. So it really depends on the context. And I think before, the original wave of thrash, I think, Motorhead had a protest element to it. And Motorhead was a punk band. I remember buying a punk compilation, and it had Generation X with a singer named Billy Idol, before anybody knew who he was. The Rods, all these, the Damned, all these punk bands. And then there's Motorhead. And I didn't know they were heading up, but I remember listening to that sound. It's dirty, it's angry, it's awful, but awesome. So I think any sound that generates that reaction, there's a protest element. But then it becomes the norm and it sort of loses its novelty.
Yeah, we can take one more question that comes from Cynthia.
I would just like to return to your very interesting comments about being a thinking musician, because I've been running a seminar series at our university for several years, and it's cross-disciplinary, and it's about music and aesthetics. And I often will invite people who regard themselves as performing musicians to come and talk about something that has been important to them with regard to some piece they've prepared or some composer about whom they really feel very strongly, et cetera, et cetera. And I have never had a presentation from these people that is not as good as, if not better, than the people who are supposed to be practicing academics and who give seminars. And I would just have to venture this and hear what you think about it. Don't you think that just the whole activity of thinking has a very rhythmic quality to it, and has you have a beginning, you have to reach a conclusion of some sort, you have to do it within a certain time span so that people's attention is still activated. A lot of the things that you have to do in order to keep a musical performance interesting, I think, map very nicely onto argumentation and onto presentation of ideas and to bringing an idea to fruition and thinking it through. And musicians, I would think, have a real edge with regard to this kind of mental activity compared, say, with someone who doesn't have that sort of experience upon which to draw.
Oh, that's an really great point. I appreciate your comments. And, yeah, you know, I'm not sure why certain musicians communicate the way they do, or lack of communication. Yeah, there are great musicians that it is very difficult to have a conversation with. My hero that I keep citing, Eddie Van Halen. I once met him, and it wasn't a pleasant experience. I didn't know that he had a massive alcohol abuse problem. But it was 1 in the afternoon, and he was just did not make a good impression. And you can see old interviews of him where he's just kind of not thinking, not processing, but yet somehow you put that instrument in his hand. Just magic what happens. It's nice to see him in recent years. He's actually sounding really good on these reunion shows, and he seems more coherent. But I think that he's also a rare example. I really think it's some sort of genius mentality. And this is a guy that he didn't like his sound, so he destroyed his guitar and rebuilt it. You just don't do that. Yeah. He didn't like the sound of the pickup. Okay, I'm going to dip my pickup in wax. So I'm going to try that. The stuff he came up with, it's insane. It's brilliant. And I mentioned earlier that I didn't really, as a kid, I didn't really relate to the academic communities I was witnessing. I didn't want to hear about who got tenure and whose kid went to Stanford. The scene just didn't interest me. And then my escape was heavy metal, guitar. And then when I was doing it professionally, it just seemed like all anybody wanted to talk about was heavy metal. And who's cool and who sucks. There's other, but I guess that part of my brain, the curiosity, was still there. And it existed. I was thinking beyond that. So I didn't relate to either one. And I'm thankful to see that there are people here. There's events like this. There's people with hard rock and metal interests that can talk about things beyond hard rock and metal and celebrity culture and very basic stuff. Which is fine. It's fine to talk about it, but I don't like to talk about that all the time. I want to have more interesting conversations. And I think, I'm encouraged, but there are musicians out there that I can actually have, they're rare, but I can, I mentioned Lamb of God earlier. Randy Blythe has gotten to be a good friend. He's a very creative person. And he would have no problem sitting in this room following along. And he would ask intelligent questions. I actually did a podcast that coincidentally airs today the singer for Hate Week, Jamie Johnson. And I was very surprised when I sat down with him. And I told him a little bit about what I talked to you about, some of these public affairs programs on PBS that I grew up with, that I was tortured by. And he said, oh, you mean like Washington Week in Review? McNeil Lehrer Report? You know these shows? You too? Oh, you're a prisoner of PBS as well, right? Yeah, so I think we exist. We just, the thinking musician exists. We just, we need a louder voice. And, I think events like this are helping us as well as hopefully helping anybody with interest in metal and things beyond metal.
All right. So thank you, Peter.
Okay, thank you.